June 23, 1942. Royal Air Force spotters at Pembrey Airfield in South Wales stood frozen, binoculars pressed to their faces, watching something that shouldn't exist. A sleek German fighter, piercing through the cloud layer, descending in a perfect approach pattern toward their runway. Every instinct screamed danger. Alert sirens should have been wailing across the base. Anti-aircraft batteries should have been swinging into firing position, tracking the enemy aircraft through their sights. But something about this moment felt wrong. The approach was too smooth, too deliberate, too confident. The Focke-Wulf 190 touched down with barely a bounce on the grass runway, rolling smoothly past sandbag emplacements and camouflaged hangars, before coming to rest near the control tower. The engine noise died away. The canopy slid back with a mechanical hiss, and Oberleutnant Armin Faber of Jagdgeschwader climbed out of his cockpit, pulled off his leather-flying helmet, and took his first real look at his surroundings. Then, his world shattered. The aircraft lined up on the flight line weren't Messerschmitt 109s. They were Spitfires, British Spitfires. The uniforms rushing toward him weren't Luftwaffe gray. They were Royal Air Force blue. And the realization that struck Faber in that heart-stopping moment was the same one simultaneously electrifying British intelligence officers across southern England. Germany's most lethal fighter, the aircraft that had been systematically destroying Allied pilots for 8 brutal months, the mysterious new weapon that seemed utterly invincible in aerial combat, had just been delivered intact, gift-wrapped, directly into Britain's hands, by a pilot who thought he was landing in occupied France. The intelligence coup was staggering beyond measure. But what American test pilots would soon discover when they finally got their hands on this machine would fundamentally reshape how every single Allied fighter engaged German aircraft for the entire remainder of the war. For 8 months, the Focke-Wulf 190 had been a nightmare haunting Allied pilots across the English Channel. It first appeared in combat over France in September 1941, and from its very first engagement, pilots knew they were confronting something extraordinary, something terrifying. Royal Air Force Squadron leader James Edgar Johnson, who would eventually become Britain's highest-scoring ace, encountered the FW-190 in early 1942. He barely survived the encounter. His after-action report was chilling in its honesty. It was faster than our Spitfire Mark V's in level flight, and absolutely devastating in the dive, Johnson wrote, his handwriting betraying the trauma of the experience. It could outroll us with contemptuous ease. Its firepower was apocalyptic. For the first time in the entire war, our fighters were comprehensively, completely, brutally outclassed. The cold statistics backed up the raw terror. In the first 6 months of 1942, RAF fighter losses over France climbed at an alarming rate. Experienced pilots, men who had survived the desperate days of the Battle of Britain, were being shot down by an aircraft they simply couldn't match in combat. The FW-190 could dive away from pursuing Spitfires, outroll them in turning dogfights, and obliterate them with cannons firing 20mm high-explosive shells. American pilots arriving in Britain with their P-47 Thunderbolts heard the warnings immediately. The briefings were stark and unforgiving. Don't engage the 190 in turning combat. Don't try to outroll it. Don't get into a diving competition. The list of what not to do was terrifyingly long. The list of what actually worked was almost non-existent. British intelligence desperately needed answers. What made this aircraft so lethally effective? What were its limitations? How could Allied fighters counter it and survive? But getting those answers required examining an actual FW-190 in detail, and every example shot down over Britain had been too mangled, too destroyed, too burned, to reveal its deadly secrets. Then, Armin Faber made his catastrophic mistake. Before we continue deeper into this incredible story, I'd genuinely love to know where you're watching from right now and what you already know about the legendary FW-190. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard this astonishing story before, and whether you appreciate this level of historical detail and accuracy. I truly hope you'll subscribe to the channel. These stories require serious research, weeks of cross-referencing primary sources and combat reports to get every detail exactly right. Knowing you're out there, engaged, learning, makes every hour of research worthwhile. Oberleutnant Armin Faber was not some rookie pilot fresh from training school. At 21 years old, he had already scored multiple confirmed victories against Allied aircraft. He was considered a skilled and trusted member of Jagdgeschwader II, the elite Richthofen fighter wing, carrying the legacy of Germany's most famous ace. On June 23, 1942, he was flying as part of a fighter sweep over the English Channel, providing top cover for German bombers attacking coastal targets in southern England. The mission had progressed smoothly until the return flight, somewhere over the Channel. During aggressive maneuvering while engaging British fighters, Faber became disoriented. Heavy cloud cover completely obscured the coastline below. The sun's position, filtered through the clouds, gave him false directional cues, and when he finally broke through the cloud layer and saw green countryside with an airfield clearly visible below, his mind made a simple, logical, but absolutely catastrophic assumption. He thought he was over northern France, looking at a Luftwaffe forward operating base. He was actually over Wales, staring down at RAF Pembry. The mistake seems impossible in hindsight. How could an experienced combat pilot make such a fundamental navigational error? But combat disorientation was far more common than military authorities ever publicly admitted. Pilots flying at extreme speeds through dense clouds, pulling high-G maneuvers that literally drained blood flow from the brain, sometimes completely lost their sense of direction and spatial awareness. Faber had executed a 180-degree turn during the chaotic dogfight and simply didn't realize it. His internal compass had been scrambled by the violence of aerial combat. When he touched down and saw the Spitfires, when he registered the British roundels on the wings, Faber's survival instincts kicked in immediately. He frantically attempted to restart his engine and take off again before anyone could react. But RAF personnel were already sprinting toward the aircraft from multiple directions. Within 2 minutes, he was surrounded. Within 5 minutes, he was in custody, hands bound. And British intelligence officers were already examining the pristine, undamaged, fully intact Focke-Wulf 190A sitting on their runway like a gift from the heavens. The immediate reaction at RAF headquarters in London bordered on euphoria. Air Chief Marshal Sholto Douglas, commanding RAF Fighter Command, immediately ordered the aircraft transported under armed guard to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough for comprehensive testing. Every single aspect of the machine was to be documented, photographed, measured, and analyzed in excruciating detail. Within 48 hours, the FW-190 was at Farnborough, being meticulously inspected by Britain's top aviation engineers and combat pilots. What they discovered explained everything. Every terrifying report, every mysterious loss, every advantage Allied pilots had been experiencing in brutal combat. The aircraft was a genuine masterpiece of practical engineering philosophy. While the Spitfire represented elegant aerodynamic design with flowing curves, the FW-190 embodied brutal, uncompromising functionality. Its BMW 801 radial engine produced 1,700 horsepower, compared to the Spitfire Mark V's 1,470. But raw engine power wasn't the complete story. The FW-190's most devastating combat advantage, the characteristic that had been killing Allied pilots, was its phenomenal roll rate. The aircraft could snap from one bank to the opposite bank faster than any Allied fighter in service. This seemingly minor characteristic was actually revolutionary, game-changing in aerial combat dynamics. When a Spitfire tried to follow an FW-190 through rapid rolling maneuvers, the British fighter simply couldn't keep pace. The German pilot could reverse direction, gain angular advantage, and line up killing shots before the Allied pilot could even react to the initial movement. British test pilot Captain Eric Brown, who would eventually fly more captured enemy aircraft than any other Allied pilot in history, flew the captured FW-190 extensively at Farnborough. He immediately understood, viscerally, why Allied pilots were dying in such numbers. The ailerons were feather-light and instantly responsive at all speeds, Brown reported in his classified evaluation. You could literally throw this aircraft around the sky with almost no physical effort. The Spitfire required muscle, finesse, anticipation. The FW-190 responded to thought, to intention. It was like the aircraft could read your mind. The firepower advantage was equally stunning, equally terrifying. The FW-190A3 variant carried four 20mm MG-151 cannons, plus two 7.92mm machine guns. A 2-second burst delivered more explosive, destructive power than a Spitfire Mark V could generate in 10 full seconds of continuous firing, and the weapons were mounted in the wings close to the fuselage, creating a tight concentration pattern that was absolutely devastating. At typical combat ranges, the dive, performance explained how FW-190s consistently escaped pursuing Spitfires that should have caught them. The German fighter's heavier weight combined with cleaner aerodynamics meant it could outdive anything the RAF currently flew. British pilots who tried to follow an FW-190 into a steep dive watched helplessly, frustrated, as the German aircraft simply pulled away, accelerating beyond reach. But the exhaustive testing also revealed weaknesses, critical vulnerabilities, and this is where the intelligence value transformed from tactical to strategic gold for Allied air forces worldwide. The FW-190's powerful radial engine, while delivering impressive performance at low altitude, created serious cooling problems at high altitudes. Above 20,000 feet, the aircraft's performance fell off dramatically. Noticeably, the engine struggled in the thin air, and pilots reported significant loss of power and dangerous overheating issues that could lead to engine failure. Meanwhile, the Spitfire's legendary Merlin engine, specifically designed for high-altitude interception operations, actually performed better as altitude increased. The supercharger system came into its element in the thin upper atmosphere. The heavy weight that made the FW-190 a superior dive bomber also made it less maneuverable in sustained turning combat. The aircraft could outroll a Spitfire in quick maneuvers, but it absolutely couldn't outturn one in a prolonged circular engagement. If an Allied pilot could somehow force an FW-190 into a sustained horizontal turning fight, the advantage shifted decisively. Most critically, American engineers discovered something the German designers probably considered a minor compromise. The FW-190's controls became extremely heavy, almost immovable, at very high speeds. In a dive exceeding 400 miles per hour, the pilot needed tremendous physical strength just to pull out of the dive. This created a brief but exploitable vulnerable moment. If an Allied fighter could pursue an FW-190 through the initial dive and catch it during the pull-out phase when the German pilot was literally fighting his own aircraft controls, attacks became suddenly feasible, even easy. British intelligence immediately began distributing classified tactical bulletins to RAF squadrons across southern England and the Mediterranean theater. But they also did something that would prove absolutely crucial for the entire air war's ultimate outcome. They invited American test pilots to Farnborough to fly the captured FW-190 themselves, to feel it, to understand it, to learn its language. In August 1942, U.S. Army Air Force pilots arrived at the classified testing facility to examine Germany's secret weapon firsthand. These pilots would return to American training bases with knowledge, with understanding, that would save hundreds, perhaps thousands, of American lives in the brutal air battles to come. Major Cass Hu, one of the first American pilots to actually fly the captured FW-190, filed a detailed tactical report that was immediately classified top secret and distributed to every fighter group preparing to deploy to the European theater. His assessment was blunt, tactical, and potentially life-saving. The FW-190 will beat any Allied fighter below 20,000 feet. If the German pilot knows what he's doing and fights to his aircraft's strengths, Hof wrote with stark clarity, "Our advantage is altitude, period. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and the newer Spitfire variants have the decisive edge. Force them high, and we win. Let them dictate low-altitude combat terms, and we die." It's that simple. This single piece of hard intelligence, derived from one captured aircraft, fundamentally changed American fighter doctrine across the entire European theater. When P-47 Thunderbolt units began combat operations in 1943, their tactical doctrine emphasized high-altitude engagement as an absolute priority. Bomber escort formations flew at maximum sustainable altitude. Fighter sweeps operated above 25,000 feet whenever operationally possible. When German fighters attempted to engage American formations, American flight leaders would immediately climb, deliberately forcing the FW-190s to follow into the thin air where their engines labored and stuttered and lost power. The captured FW-190 also directly influenced American aircraft development. Programs back in the United States. Engineers at Wright Field in Ohio studied the revolutionary roll rate advantage intensively and began aggressively modifying P-47 and P-51 aileron systems to dramatically improve roll responsiveness. The FW-190's concentrated gun placement informed American thinking about optimal weapons arrangement and convergence patterns. Even the cockpit layout, which German designers had meticulously optimized for combat efficiency and pilot situational awareness, influenced American fighter cockpit design philosophy for years afterward. But perhaps the most important psychological lesson, the most valuable insight, came from understanding that the FW-190 wasn't some invincible superweapon. It was an excellent aircraft, brilliantly designed, with specific advantages in certain flight regimes, and equally specific exploitable weaknesses in others. Allied pilots, who had been psychologically intimidated by the 190's fearsome reputation, who had approached every engagement expecting to die, now had concrete tactical information about how to fight it and win. The psychological shift was profound. By late 1943, the tactical situation over Europe had shifted dramatically. The hunted had become the hunters. American P-47 Thunderbolts and the newer P-51 Mustangs were routinely engaging FW-190s at high altitude, where Allied fighters held the decisive advantage. RAF Spitfire, Mark 9s, equipped with upgraded Merlin engines, could now match the FW-190's performance across most altitude ranges. And pilots on both sides of the conflict understood they were flying fundamentally different aircraft, optimized for different combat conditions, requiring different tactical approaches. The kill ratios began shifting measurably in Allied favor. FW-190 losses climbed steadily as American and British pilots systematically exploited the intelligence gained from Faber's accidentally delivered aircraft. German pilots began noticing something disturbing. Allied fighters were no longer making the basic tactical mistakes that had given the FW-190 its early overwhelming dominance. Oberleutnant Josef Pips Priller, Phi-D, a high-scoring FW-190 ace with over 100 confirmed victories, commented in late 1943 that American pilots had clearly studied the aircraft in detail. His private combat journal entries reveal his growing frustration. They know not to follow us into rolling scissors maneuvers anymore. They systematically force us higher, where our engines labor and lose power. They've adapted. They've learned. Someone has been teaching them our weaknesses. The captured FW-190 remained at Farnborough throughout the entire war, serving as an invaluable reference aircraft for evaluating new German variants as they appeared in combat. When the FW-190 D9 Dora, with its inline liquid-cooled engine, appeared in late 1944, Allied intelligence immediately compared it against Faber's captured aircraft, understanding exactly how German designers had addressed the original design's high-altitude performance limitations. After the war ended, aviation historians meticulously calculated the strategic impact of Faber's navigation error. The intelligence gained from examining the intact FW-190 was systematically shared with thousands of Allied pilots through tactical bulletins, classified training films, and direct demonstration flights at multiple training bases. The knowledge directly influenced aircraft development programs, tactical doctrine refinement, and operational planning across multiple Allied air forces. The ripple effects were immeasurable. Captain Eric Brown, who flew more captured enemy aircraft than any other Allied pilot in history, would later write in his memoirs, "Faber's navigation error gave us the Rosetta Stone for understanding German fighter design philosophy and combat tactics. Every tactical advantage the FW-190 possessed was meticulously documented and analyzed. Every weakness was identified and ruthlessly exploited. That single aircraft, delivered by pure accident, probably saved more Allied lives than any other intelligence operation of the entire war." The bitter irony was not lost on German intelligence officers when they eventually learned what had happened. One senior Luftwaffe intelligence officer commented after the war, "We spent months, years, trying to capture a Spitfire Mark IX intact so we could study its improvements and develop effective counter-tactics. The British didn't have to try at all. We delivered our most advanced fighter, our secret weapon, directly to them. Gift-wrapped, Armin Faber spent the remainder of World War II in a prisoner-of-war camp in Canada, far from the European skies where he had once been a feared hunter. He survived the war and returned to Germany, where he lived quietly until 1976. Luftwaffe records suggest he was initially blamed, even vilified, for the catastrophic loss of the aircraft and the intelligence disaster that followed. But later, more measured assessments acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. Combat disorientation could happen to any pilot, regardless of skill or experience. The human brain, pushed to its limits by high-G maneuvers, adrenaline, and the chaos of aerial combat, sometimes simply fails. The real question, the question that haunted German military planners, was why they had assumed the British would never get their hands on an intact FW-190, why they had no contingency plan for this exact scenario. Overconfidence, assumption, the belief that their pilots were too skilled, too careful, to make such a mistake. The story of Faber's captured fighter teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of technological advantage in modern warfare. Germany's Focke-Wulf 190 represented a genuine quantum leap in fighter aircraft design when it first appeared in 1941. For nearly a year, it dominated Allied aircraft through superior performance and genuinely innovative engineering solutions. But that overwhelming advantage evaporated almost overnight, the moment Allied engineers could physically examine the actual machine, touch it, fly it, understand it. No aircraft is truly invincible. Every design involves compromises and trade-offs. Engineering is about choosing which compromises you can live with. The FW-190's low-altitude dominance came at the direct cost of high-altitude performance. Its excellent roll rate came with heavy high-speed controls that created vulnerability. Its powerful armament added weight that reduced sustained maneuverability. Once Allied pilots understood these fundamental trade-offs, once they had the tactical knowledge, they could systematically exploit them. The psychological advantage shifted. The mystique evaporated. Today, the Focke-Wulf 190 is remembered as one of World War II's truly great fighter aircraft designs. Aviation museums around the world display surviving examples as masterpieces of German engineering ingenuity and design philosophy. But the aircraft's historical reputation is forever inseparable from the intelligence coup that revealed all its secrets. In the complex calculus of wartime advantage, one pilot's momentary disorientation over the English Channel, one navigation error in the clouds, turned Germany's most feared secret weapon into an open book, an instruction manual for Allied pilots. The FW-190 that Armin Faber accidentally delivered to Britain became the very aircraft that taught the Allies how to win the air war over Europe. The lesson echoes through military history across every conflict and every generation. Superior technology matters enormously, but superior intelligence, understanding your enemy's capabilities and limitations, matters infinitely more. And sometimes, the greatest victories don't come from devastating attacks or brilliant strategy. They come from simple mistakes, from human error, that give your enemy exactly what they've been desperately seeking. The Focke-Wulf 190 could have remained shrouded in mystery, an invincible opponent that continued slaughtering Allied pilots through psychological intimidation as much as technical superiority. Instead, it became a teaching tool, a reference standard, something that every Allied pilot studied intensively, learned from completely, and ultimately defeated systematically. One navigation error, one landed aircraft, one intelligence windfall that fundamentally changed the air war over Europe forever. That's how America got Germany's secret fighter, and that's how a single human mistake, made in a moment of confusion thousands of feet above the English Channel, shifted the balance of power in the skies above Europe. The war would rage for 3 more years. Millions more would die. But in the complex web of causation that determines victory and defeat, one German pilot's accidental landing in Wales gave the Allies the key to air superiority. And with air superiority came ultimate victory. Sometimes history turns on the smallest moments, the briefest mistakes, and one pilot, forever, will be remembered not for his victories, but for the day he landed on the wrong airfield and changed everything.